Hey everyone, and welcome to SLO City Church at home, online, wherever you are. My name is Brent. I'm humbled to be one of the pastors here at SLO City Church, and I'm really glad that you are joining with us wherever you are, however you're listening today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube so you can stay up to date with all the content that's coming up, from groups at home to different little resources that we're creating to help you and me and us and we find and follow Jesus, to grow in our faith, to grow in our walks with Jesus. We're really glad that you're here with us. I want to start with something that Jesus says in John chapter 8. This is what Jesus says. John 8, 31 through 33 says this: "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Have you heard that before? The truth will set you free. The truth. That is something real, something genuine, something factual or accurate or legitimate or verified. The Latin word used for truth is veritas. The veritas will set you free. Truth can set you free. Truth is powerful, isn't it? Have you ever run into a truth in your life that has moved you? Truth has the power to move people, to correct people, to build people up, or to tear something down, to sharpen or encourage. The truth has the power to change a lot of things. What's a truth that you've discovered in your life, or seen in your life, or been told in your life about something or about someone, and it changed everything? Have you ever had a moment in your life where maybe the truth was withheld from you, or you withheld the truth from someone else? I'll never forget when I was in 5th grade, I got in a fight on the bus. Now, it was crazy. Actually, I remember it being quite, it wasn't really a fight. I called it a fight, but my friends were embarrassed of me when I called it a fight. But I got a fight on the bus in this incredibly awkward way with this other kid, and we were yapping at each other. And anyways, in this fight, I accidentally bent back Alvin Reese's finger, and his finger broke. And I remember Miss Thompson, the bus driver, pulled me off the bus and dragged me into Mr. McCarg's principal's office. And we sat there, and I sat in this intimidating silence until my mother arrived. And I cried, and I was embarrassed, and I was ashamed, and I had done something incredibly wrong. And I remember my mom was there talking to the principal. We get into the car to go to dinner with my dad, and the intimidation and the anxiety began to overwhelm me. And I'll never forget, my mom just looked at me and she said, "Hey, Brent, this can be our secret. We won't have to tell Dad." Now, I don't suggest that parenting style. That doesn't come with like flying recommendations to keep things from your parents, because I appreciated my mother's care for me. But I remember in that moment, okay, so I'm going to hide this truth from my dad. I'm going to hide what happened from my dad. I'm going to lie to him about my day. When he says, "Why were you guys late for dinner?" Well, I'll have to just make something up. And I remember that untruth, that lie, hiding that truth from my dad ate me up. It ate me up for weeks and weeks and weeks, just knowing that I hadn't told him about Alvin Reese's broken finger. Have you ever experienced the power of an untruth, of a lie? Actually, I was telling my wife that story. I've never to this day told my dad that I broke Alvin Reese's finger. So I am confessing with you to my dad, "Dad, I'm sorry, I lied to you all those years ago." Have you ever really experienced the power of an untruth? It can bind you up, can't it? It can cause anxiety. It can cause division. And the truth can really heal you, set you free, bring reconciliation and restoration. Several years ago, I learned about the Innocence Project that seeks to assist those who are wrongly convicted and imprisoned. And this past week specifically, I was reading about Kevin Strickland, who had been in prison for 43 years for a crime he swore he did not commit. He was locked up behind bars in chains for a crime that he swore he didn't commit. And he just sat year after year, decade after decade, believing, knowing the truth, but waiting for someone to listen to him. And then finally, the passionate people at the Innocence Project came around Kevin Strickland's story. They dug into the details of the case, and they saw that Kevin couldn't have committed the crime that he was imprisoned for. He had a hard alibi that was overlooked in the original investigation, and a witness was intimidated into lying about his whereabouts. And when the truth was finally revealed through this whole long, epic court battle, after 43 years, the truth was discovered and everything changed. He was set free. The truth can set you free. The truth can set a person free. The truth can correct things, encourage things, heal things, move people from death to life, to their purpose, restore people. The truth is powerful, and it can change everything. When secrets are revealed, when shame is uncovered, it can change everything. Last week we kicked off this series called This Changes Everything, because we believe that when we fully run into Jesus, when we come face to face and eyeball to eyeball with Jesus, everything changes. We're a church that's built on the reality that Jesus changes everything. Everything. And as we open up the good news accounts or the gospel accounts of Jesus' life in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see interactions with Jesus that change people's lives. We see the teachings and the heart of Jesus exposed, the very character and nature of God on display, and it changes things. In John chapter 1, verse 14, John writes, "We saw this change happen. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. God in the flesh walked among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Full of grace and truth. I love this. John says, we have seen God walk with us, totally wrapped up in Jesus. And here's what he was like. He was full of grace and truth. He was complete and whole and filled to the brim with grace and with truth. Today, I want to look at the reality that truth changes everything. And we'll see an interaction with Jesus where Jesus walks truth into a situation and everything changed. This interaction happens in John chapter 8. Now, Jesus is in Jerusalem, which is like kind of the capital city of the entire area. The temple was there. The markets were there. Religion was there. Politics were there. Every powerful person and elite, everybody came to Jerusalem for everything. And Jesus is in the temple courts and he's teaching. And people are gathering around him because things change when we gather around Jesus. And something really interesting happens. We're going to read it in John chapter 8, starting in verse 2. It says this, "At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and Jesus sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery, in the act, and they made her stand before the group. And then they said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses commands us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?' They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. I just want to kind of slow down and break down what's happening here. Jesus is teaching in the temple courts about the character and the nature and the heart of God. It is this public place buzzing with activity, and people come to Jerusalem to try and get right with God, have this right relationship with God. They're bringing all of their baggage and all of their things, and Jesus is teaching a radical new thing about God, that God actually comes and looks for his children to find them. God loves the world and wants to rescue the world. And in the middle of this incredible teaching, people are gathering around from very public. A group of men walk up. It says the teachers and the Pharisees, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees, these high elites, bring in a woman into the middle of Jesus' teaching. This woman has been caught in the act of adultery, and they make her stand in front of the group. People are everywhere. People are everywhere trying to connect to God and one another. And Jesus is teaching, and someone grabs a woman caught in the act of adultery. We see a woman. We see a woman whose life hasn't ended up the way that she had hoped or planned. She's gotten caught up in some things that she shouldn't have gotten caught up in, and has been found out. Somehow, some way. Have you ever been caught in something that you weren't proud of? Have you ever been found out? Have your secrets, have your shames, have your guilty moments ever been exposed? Have you ever been caught in the act of something? I have. I have. The shame and the embarrassment of being found in your mistakes is so incredibly painful, isn't it? So incredibly vulnerable, so incredibly painful and exposing. And we see a woman caught in the act of adultery, caught in the act of a very hard, exposing mistake, behavior. And now we don't know where the man is in the other end of the adultery conversation. We just know that this woman is brought up, pulled up in a public place, her sin and her shame, her mistakes exposed. And then we see a group of men. These men are religious. They are teachers of the law. And somehow, some way, they have pried into this woman's personal life and caught her. Like they catch her, not to help her, not to heal her, not to restore her, but they catch her to use her. Notice this. They bring her in and make her stand before the group. Jesus is there teaching, and can you imagine how much shame, how much embarrassment she must be feeling by being thrown on stage in the middle of a sermon? Her whole life, she's felt objectified by men, and now this group of religious men are objectifying her. They are using her to prove a point. They're using her for the object of their own personal, political, religious gains and power and control. They are using a woman's sin, her shame, her story as a teaching tool and as an opportunity to try and trap Jesus. They don't see her worth. They don't see her value. They don't see her as a much loved daughter of God. They're using her as an object. This is a sad, sick, twisted, corrupt, unjust situation. And it presents itself right in front of Jesus. This group of men grabs this woman, they put her in front of everybody, exposing her shame, and they say, Jesus, we have a question for you. We have a question for you. Should we stone this woman? They have stones in their hands. They're ready to stone this woman. The law of Moses says that we should stone this woman. What do you say? What do you say, Jesus? And they keep on pressing Jesus. Now, this is a lose-lose for Jesus. Because if Jesus says, yeah, follow the law of Moses and stone her, then he's breaking Roman law, because Roman law kept people from executing outside of their oversight. And if he would have said, no, let her go, he would have been going against religious law, and they would have grounds both ways to arrest Jesus. And so Jesus is caught in this interesting situation. A broken woman, bitter men, objectifying men, in a difficult situation. I want us to notice what Jesus does here. I want us to see the way that Jesus walks forward with truth, with honesty, with a genuineness, with an authenticity, with an accuracy, with facts, with the truth. And the truth leads his way. We're going to see right here that Jesus starts with a truth that considers. A truth that considers. Look at the text. It says this, but Jesus, hearing their questions, bent down, knelt down, and started to write on the ground with his finger. Jesus has this chaotic situation unfold before him. He sees a broken and ashamed woman who's being used. He hears the bitter, rage-filled questions of religious men and the whispers of the crowd wondering what Jesus is going to say to the question of, should we execute her? Should we stone her? What do you say, Jesus? What does Jesus do? What does Jesus do? Before we see what Jesus does, what would you do? What would you do? What do you do when maybe you're faced with a hard situation? When you're pressed on every side to answer some problem or give an opinion or give a defense, when there are all these feelings and emotions involved and people watching, do you rush to a response? Do you rush to cast a quick judgment or a quick sentence or post something or fire off that email or respond quickly? What do you do? I had a friend this week who surprisingly ended up in a meeting that he didn't expect, and he's just feeling attacked. You said, Brent, how do I respond? How do you respond? Well, what does Jesus do? Notice this. Where does Jesus go? Jesus takes a moment to consider the truths around him. And to consider the truth, he actually takes a breath. It says he bends down, he gets low, he kneels in the dirt. Why is he kneeling in the dirt? Well, he's kneeling next to this woman. He starts to write something with his finger, and he takes a minute to consider, takes a minute to think. He locks eyes with the accused. He hears the tone of voice from the puffed up religious leaders around him. He's not responding with aggression or with rage. He got low in the dirt, and maybe he prayed. Maybe he was reminding himself of some scriptures. Maybe he just took a breath because he knew the severity of the moment. But we see before Jesus says anything, before he answers, he was committed to just understanding the truth, to being considerate, to being thoughtful, to being collected, to being calm, to being a little calculated in his response. Larry Crabb is a psychologist and a follower of Jesus who says this. He says, "It is the understanding of others and the awareness of their needs that the follower of Christ should strive to cultivate." It is the understanding of others and the awareness of their needs that you and I, followers of Jesus, should strive to grow and cultivate in us. See, because truth, being able to walk in truth, begins with awareness, begins with taking time to consider the needs and to consider trying to understand other people. And we see this in Jesus. He kneels down, he wrote in the dirt, he got low next to the broken, he heard the anger, he grew in this awareness. And they just keep on pressing him. But truth started with consideration. It was a truth that was considerate. So they keep on questioning him. They keep on pressing Jesus. And Jesus finally speaks. And this might be surprising to you, but he speaks up with a truth that confronts. A truth that was considerate, but a truth that confronts. Look what he says. He says, when they kept on questioning him, Jesus straightened up and said to him, "Okay, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again, he stooped down and he wrote on the ground. Jesus hears all these questions, takes a breath, calms his heart, calms his nerves, prays, writes in the dirt, gets low, humbles himself, and then he speaks up with a confrontational word. He speaks up, he straightens up, he looks at the men who are questioning him, and he says, "Let the sinless one among you throw the first stone." That's all he says. And he kneels back down, and he starts to write in the dirt. What's Jesus doing here? He's confronting them. He's coming face to face with them. He's challenging them. He is meeting the moment with truth. See, truth confronts, and truth speaks some hard things sometimes. When my little girl was littler, I went through a really busy season in my life. Do those ever stop? Do busy seasons ever stop? And I'll never forget the day she climbed up in my lap. I had come home from work and I was still working on my phone. And I'm just looking at my phone and my little girl's trying to get my attention. She snatched the phone out of my hands and she just said, Dad, can I ask you a question?" Just really bright and happy. She said, "What do you like more, me or your phone?" And I remember it just cut me. My little girl spoke a confrontational truth into my heart that day. See, truth, facts, honesty, authenticity, genuineness confronts some of the error in us, confronts some of the wrongs in us. And we all need confronting throughout our lives, don't we? Can I ask you, how confrontable are you? How able are you to be corrected, rebuked, encouraged, challenged, confronted? How willing are you to let anybody else tell you something that you've done wrong or the error of your ways? How correctable, how confrontable are you? We see Jesus speaks a confrontational truth. And I want you to get this. Jesus was kind throughout his life. Absolutely. But Jesus was extremely confrontational. You may not enjoy this, but you may not enjoy a truth that hurts. And Jesus maybe knew that it didn't feel good to have the truth told about you. But confrontational truth is a truth that we all need. He says, he who, like the sinless one, you're wanting to stone this woman because of her sin and her shame. If you are without sin, go ahead, throw the first stone. What's he saying? You are just as wrought with secrets as she is. You are just as exposed and vulnerable and sinful as she is. He is speaking a hard truth to loose the grip of hatred in their hearts and bitterness, to confront bigotry and the devaluing of other people. He says, he calls out someone to see he calls out this group of men to see their actions that are causing harm on others and on themselves. Jesus was confrontational. I want you to get that. Some of you peacemakers need to hear this. Jesus was confrontational. Some of you prideful people need to hear this. We need to hear this. Jesus is confrontational. In Matthew 23, Jesus kind of tears into some of the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. I just want to hop around here. He says they don't practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put it on other people's shoulders, but they themselves, they're not willing to lift a finger to move anything. Everything they do is done for people to see. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats at parties. And he says, woe. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees. You have neglected the more important matters of justice and mercy and faithfulness. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but the inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear like you're righteous, but on the inside, you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Man, Jesus, that sounds mean. But what if Jesus speaks a truth to confront the wrongs in us so that they don't remain in us? That's what a truth that confronts does, doesn't it? Without truth, the worst of us, the wounds in us, remain in us. Without some hard truths that are spoken to us, how able are you to receive a hard truth? Jesus speaks this. And I love what A.W. Tozer says about Jesus. He says this, Jesus knows the worst about you. Nonetheless, he is the one who loves you most. So in Jesus' great love, he confronts. And in this moment, where a group of men throw a woman in front of everyone in a public environment, he confronts them. And he says, he levels the playing field and says, are you without sin? I didn't think so. Let me confront you about your sin. How confrontable are you? He goes on. And the story goes on in verse 9. Jesus introduces a hard truth into a messy situation. And then verse 9 goes on, it says this, at this, those who heard what Jesus said began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman standing there. So Jesus confronts them about pride, about arrogance, about sin in their life, about the way that they're using and objectifying a woman. He calls it out in them. He says, don't be hypocritical here. He confronts them, and they heard, and they saw, and they understood, and one by one they walk away. Jesus is back down on the ground, kneeling in the dirt next to someone who's embarrassed, next to this woman who's been exposed. She's weeping. And Jesus locks eyes with her. And I want you to notice what he does next. Like, get this picture. The stones that were meant for this woman are dropped around them. The stones that were meant to execute this woman, to condemn this woman, are scattered around them. And Jesus speaks up with another truth. He says this. Jesus straightened up and he asked the woman, woman, why are you, where are they? Where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. He says, has no one condemned you? Where is everyone? All of these that came to harm you, to judge you, to condemn you, where are they? Is anyone left? And she says, no one, sir. No one's here to condemn me. And he speaks a truth that comforts. A truth that comforts. He's spoken a truth that confronts, and now he speaks a truth that comforts. He says, I do not condemn you. I don't condemn you either. Do you know the power and the comfort of those words wrapped in truth? I do not condemn you. I do not want to crush you. I do not want to heap condemnation on your head and on your heart. I do not heap guilt and shame all over your life, but I forgive you. William Barclay says this, some clamoreth for the thrill of exercising power to condemn, but Jesus knew the thrill of exercising the power to forgive. Jesus knew the thrill and the joy of exercising power, not to condemn, but to forgive. A few weeks ago, I sat in the middle of a room with two people. One individual had put their hands in their hearts to something horrible and inflicted great pain on the other person. They were there acknowledging their wrong, the pain that they had caused, the deep hurt, regret and shame that they felt at a heart and soul level. And I sat and I listened as my friend, the one who had been wounded, responded with words that stunned me. This person said, I am incredibly hurt by what you did, by what you said. I'm not sure I'll ever be the same or our relationship will ever be the same. And then they said this, but as Jesus forgave me and forgives me at my worst, I'll forgive you. I forgive you. And when those words were uttered, something broke open in that room, like chains being broken. When that truth is understood and revealed and extended, something changes, and Jesus speaks a truth that confronts the oppressor, and a truth that confronts the sin, and a truth that then comforts the condemned. He says, I don't condemn you, I forgive you. That is a truth that comforts our souls. Romans 8:1 says this, therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Can you imagine the love and the grace and the freedom that washes over this woman whose private life was exposed? That washes over this woman whose sin was on public display, and to have Jesus, God in the flesh, walk into her life and share this truth with her. I forgive you. There is no condemnation for you when you are in me, when you trust me. What weight was lifted in her? I forgive you. What changes when she receives that truth? What changes in her mind? What changes in her heart? What weight is off of her shoulders? What chains have been broken? I don't condemn you. I forgive you. What a life-changing truth. Can I ask you, have you received that truth from Jesus? Have you ran into the Jesus, the God, who came to get in the dirt with you, to lock eyes with you and say, I don't condemn you. I forgive you. All of those stains, all of those secrets, all of those shame, all of that past baggage, all of those untruths that you've told, all those lives that you've lived and you've chased after, I forgive you. Have you received that truth that God forgives? That God forgives in Jesus. It changes everything. Jesus goes on. He says, I don't condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. He says, go. He says, I don't condemn you, but can I tell you, go now. I'm challenging you. Go now and leave your life of sin. We see Jesus with a truth that comforts. He forgives, but it also demands something of us, doesn't it? When that truth comforts us, and the truth that God is grace and love and mercy and a forgiver, and He rescues us and repairs us and redeems us, He then speaks a truth that calls us. A truth that calls us to something. A truth that demands a response in our life. A truth that calls us to change some things. He says, in light of being caught, in light of being confronted, in light of being found out, and then forgiven, not condemned, but comforted. In light of all of those things of being set free by God's grace, Jesus says, go now and leave your life of sin. Go from this place and leave here, and don't go back to the same patterns that you found yourself in. Go now and let your life be changed, and let your life be different, and let the truth that God is full of mercy and grace and forgiveness and love, let that truth change you. You don't have to go back to the same old relationships. You don't have to go back to that same old thing. You don't have to go back to that same old pattern. He says, go now. Leave it behind. Leave your life of sin. See, the truth of Jesus calls us not just to claim forgiveness for ourselves, but to live differently in light of it. The truth of Jesus calls us not to just claim forgiveness and a ticket to heaven, but to live as a witness, to live as proof that the truth of God is trustworthy, that the ways of God wash over us, what He's done for us, what He will do for us. John 8, verse 12, Jesus goes on, He says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. He goes on, if you hold to my teaching, you're my disciples. You follow after me, and then you will know the truth. You won't get caught up in a lie, and that truth will set you free. See, Jesus is in the middle of this messy, corrupt, sad, sick, unjust situation where a group of men drag a woman and make her stand exposed in her shame in front of everyone. They're trying to trap Jesus. And what does Jesus do? I want you to notice. The truth leads him. He considers the situation. He considers the angles in which everybody are trying to use one another. He's aware of the brokenness of the situation. Truth is considerate, but then he confronts. He confronts the pride. He confronts the oppression, confronts the arrogance, confronts the objectification. He then comforts. He says, I don't condemn you. I forgive you. And then he calls her up to live a different life. To live a different life. And he says, if you hold to my teaching, if you follow after me, you won't walk in darkness again. You'll have the light of life welling up in you. And when you have that light of life welling up in you, when you receive this truth of Jesus and you follow after me, you'll know the truth. And that truth will heal you, repair you, restore you, give you purpose and a direction. It calls you up to leave that life that got you caught in the same old traps that you've always fallen into and set you free. That truth, that genuineness, that honesty, that accuracy, that legitimacy of Christ, that truth of following Jesus changes everything. Can I ask you, what truth do you need to hear today? That may sound like truth is relative. I'm talking about the absolute truth that there is a God who sent His Son to rescue, restore, and redeem a broken world and a broken man and woman and a broken humanity, to restore us, to pull us back together. What truth do you need to hear today? Do you need to be confronted today? Are you confrontable about whatever it is you're stuck in? Do you need to be comforted? Do you need to hear that neither do I condemn you from Jesus' eyes and from His heart? Do you need to be called out and called up and challenged to leave your life of sin? When we run into the truth, it changes everything. And my prayer today for you, for me, for us, for we, is that the truth of Jesus would change everything in our life. Let's pray. God, we love you and we thank you for your goodness and your grace. May your truth lead us, guide our steps, direct us, rescue us, restore us, repair us, redeem us, correct us, rebuke us, put us back together, and call us into something beautiful. God, you are the God of comfort. You are the God of peace. You are the God of truth and power, and we trust you. Let the truth of who Jesus is change us. It's in His name we pray. Amen.